Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy out there. As you can tell, Bruce, Tim, and I are using our webcams for this presentation. We're just doing this to help us all feel a little bit more connected during these hectic times. And also, I would like to mention that we are using GoToWebinar to host today's event. You should be seeing the title slide of today's presentation, as well as Tim, myself, and Bruce across the top of your screen. If not, feel free to send me a chat, and I'll help you resolve that issue. Also, along the right-hand side of your screen, you should be seeing the Control Center. And in that Control Center, there are two places you're welcome to ask questions. One is under the chat panel and two under the questions panel. The last thing I'd like to mention is all microphones are muted by default at the beginning of this presentation. However, at the end of this presentation, you may click the hand icon in that control panel I just mentioned, and I will unmute you so you may ask your question. If you prefer to stay muted, you can type in those questions in the question or chat panel. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get things started. I'm going to turn it over to Tim and Bruce to talk about Teams security and governance. Take it away, guys.
All right.
All right.
I'll just start with some quick introductions. I'm Tim Homan, project manager with Peters & Associates, and I am quickly becoming a subject matter expert on Teams. This is my fourth webinar here, so I'm knee-deep in it.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Ward. I've been with the organization for 22 years. Teams has been something we've been living and breathing, but specific to our customer base, Tim and I, our organization as a whole, has engaged on providing a lot of information recently. There's been a Teams webinar series for which is this number 4. Teams 101 was kind of just orienting people to things. 201 was around use cases. 202 was around voice and conferencing, which are two specific use cases for which obviously we're not using it today, although we could, but showing Teams within Teams is kind of challenging, as well as GoToMeeting is has been our platform for about 9 months, and we're going to ride out the rest of this contract. And then I think Teams will be ready. It's come a long way in the last 9 months to being our conferencing platform for our customers. And today, after people are kind of deploying Teams, certainly hearing a lot of things in the industry about conferencing solutions that may not have all the industry protections around Teams. Well, we're not going to focus on governance specifically around conferencing and so forth. I think there are definitely some things that you'll pick up in light of Teams security relative to conferencing. So, Tim, with that, let's protect teamwork with governance and security.
All right. So here's our agenda for today. We're just going to cover some high-level topics. Really, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of switches and things to control. So just want to give you a high-level overview of all the things that you need to think about when you get started on your Teams adventure.
And there are more, I think, even outside of Teams relative to Office 365. So, you could take the data loss prevention topic and kind of get broader, right, and go into other areas. But we're going to try and focus on Teams governance today, as that's the topic. But know that this is many of these can be broadened into categories into the SharePoints and the OneDrives and Exchanges of the world.
So to get started, this is just a high-level overview of kind of how information flows within Teams. So the thing to take away here is data is stored in a lot of different places. It's stored in Exchange, in Stream, in Groups, in SharePoint, also in OneDrive. And you really need a plan that's going to, look in all those different places to, protect your data.
There's, in terms of the repositories, we certainly have a blog on our website, and there's other information you could find online with regards to what repositories specifically are being used. There's been, so if you're interested in where is this chat being stored or where is this file being stored, that information is captured separately, but to some degree this shows some of the flow as well as some of those locations.
So a real quick poll question. Teams is one of those applications where you can let your users have much a much higher level of control. So do you have other applications where your users have that kind of, administrative access?
I guess, Tim, do you want people to be thinking about their desktops, where they have administrative access, or are you really talking more of an application level?
I'm thinking more of an application level.
Yeah, okay. That's kind of what I was thinking too. And I think our goal is just to kind of get you thinking about, generally we don't give users administrative access, or that might be your thinking. And so we'll see and gauge what people's response is to this. Yeah, okay. I guess a little higher than 1/3 are saying that no, we usually don't have users with administrative access to an application, at least none that they can think of at the time. So good.
Okay.
No demonstrative all one way or all the other. I think it's a kind of an it depends, I think, answer, which people hate when consultants give that answer, but we're all employees, so we're allowed to provide that. So there we go.
All right.
And Tim, I think one of your points of asking that question is there is capability, probably even default, for something like Teams creations, right?
Exactly.
And one of the things we're finding, and one of the things we're kind of hearing already, right, from Teams rollouts that have occurred in recent weeks, obviously due to the coronavirus, we're hearing about, oh boy, I'm starting to see my Teams sprawl. We were on with a customer a couple days ago where they were like, yeah, we've already created 12 sites, and 2 of the sites have the same name. Which one's the right one? And they're at 12 sites. Wait till they get to 100, right? So, I think we had used this as a slide in Teams 101, and I think Tim's kind of bringing it back just to kind of get your brains warmed up with regards to some of the areas you're going to want to be thinking about. Mobility. Do I want this data to be synced to mobile devices? What third-party apps are you going to allow to be installed into these team sites? Guest access means just that. Guests can access it. Oh, clearly for this team, I want that, but for that team, no way, right? So there's various things about on and off. And by the way, who's monitoring guest access after you allow it? How are we going to back up this data? Do I want the data synced to non-domain joined devices? What's the naming convention? What's the difference between an owner, a creator, and a member? Things of this nature. So this is kind of the backdrop for governance and what we're thinking of. And Tim's kind of got this further categorized in 3 major buckets, I think, that we're going to be discussing. So.
Yeah. Just as a follow-up to that slide, I found a whole list of different things that kind of tie in right to the previous slide. So these are all the different ways that you can govern your data. So it's archiving, it's compliance, retention, data loss prevention, conditional access, advanced threat protection. So all of these things you see here have a role in how you can govern your data. So I thought it just tied in well.
Issue and solution. Love it. Yeah. And those are terms that obviously you're going to have to get familiar with, right? Moderator support is not something that rolls off the tongue for the average Office 365, administrator. What is moderator support, right? And, Tim, tell me, how am I going to use that solution to solve a problem? So that's partially what we're here to do today. So thanks.
So start out with creation. So Bruce mentioned it earlier. As of right now, there is no governance over site naming. So you can have the exact same team site name. So I actually did a little demonstration here. I created some. So is it HR, human resources, or the official HR site? It's all arbitrary if you don't have a plan in place. Or is it retail or retail? Which retail site is, the actual site?
I can see where that would cause problems.
Yeah. So some of the things you can do, you can create a policy that would allow you to add a prefix to a site or a suffix to a site. So actually later I'm going to demonstrate that. And I just chose department. So if you are in the manufacturing department, every site you create will start with manufacturing, and then, the site that you created. So some decision points, right, around this. We talked about naming conventions. We talked about using a policy. Well, what about classifications? So I think a newer product or classification that they've enabled, you can't do it graphically yet. You have to use PowerShell, but you could set classifications like low impact, medium impact, high impact, or internal, external, confidential, highly confidential. And that would allow you to classify your site, and then you can use retention policies or data loss prevention policies to govern the data within that site. So a lot of levers and switches to control, but things you need to think about before you get started.
And this is likely taking advantage of Microsoft has a classification scheme that they advertise through Azure Information Protection, which is essentially a featured add-on, if you will, to so there's manual classification and there's automatic classification. So in this case, Tim's talking about manual classification at a team level for the data that's likely to be housed within that team and what type of information is within there.
And then, guest access can get very complicated, right? To enable guest access, you have to do it through the Teams admin console. You have to go into Azure Active Directory. You have to go into Office 365 groups. So that just to get it enabled is a complicated process. And then once you have it enabled, what do you want guests to have access to? Calling, meetings, messaging, all those need to be decided. And then who can enable guest access? A Teams admin can do it, and a team owner can do it. So you really have to have all that locked down before you start allowing guest access.
It's good.
The next area I want to talk about is expiration. So some things you can do here. You can predefine an expiration policy. So I only want team sites to be valid for a year or 2 years or whatever you decide. And there's so then that ties into your retention policy. So now I have my site set to expire, but in the background I have a retention policy that won't let it go away. And then another way to handle that is just to archive a site. So you take that site and archive it so it's read-only and not visible, but you can still search the content of it.
So that's a new term. That's archiving, I think, is a term that gets thrown around quite often, especially for those that are maybe Exchange administrators, right? There's the idea of in-place hold, and the idea that the data, data might be deleted in email, not seen by the user, but still surfaceable through an administrative process or through an e-discovery console. This idea of archiving is indeed similar, right? It's that the data needs to be kept, but doesn't need to be seen. And so I parallel it, I guess, with that Exchange level data and that's solution term.
So I just wanted to give a quick example of what that expiration would look like. So your Teams site is set to expire, and now you'll get this Renew Now button down at the bottom. And the way it works is at 30 days, you get a notification. At 15 days, you get a notification. And at a day, you'll get a notification that your site is about to expire. And then you have that option to renew it. So what this does is, someone has left your organization and they had created a bunch of sites. Are they just going to stay there forever? Or are you going to expire them?
The good news is getting this process down early, or, not in your first 10 sites, but ideally in your first 10 sites, you've kind of given some thought to it. It doesn't negate you from being able to create sites and getting going quick. But these are some things that are going to bite you down the road when you get to 100 sites. When you get to something that really requires some management and some thought, these are areas where naming convention and things of that nature are really going to take foot.
So next area is features. And the basic features of Teams are the messaging, the meetings, and the callings. And you have the ability on a per tenant basis or a per user basis to decide who has access to those features. And then on top of that, there are applications. So I just checked this morning, and there were over 400 third-party applications that are available for Teams. So how are you going to control those features and those applications? Is it just everybody? Is it by user? And then there's a lot of policies that go into controlling that.
There's going to be claims that people need access to these features, right? That was maybe their original intention with regards to their department's adoption of Teams, was to use it for, I don't know, a marketing, some survey app that they'd like to plug in there, or from a ERP perspective. So understanding the purpose for the site and understanding the goals is certainly going to drive whether access is needed. So maybe it's just a validation and a check-in, but without this validation, you can have dozens of apps suddenly having access to your data, and from a security perspective, obviously, as well as functionality perspective, those things, as well as licensing costs potentially. All of these things are factors that oftentimes are centrally controlled, and as we move to a little bit more of a decentralized model, it's good to know that there are decision points that can be made around applications.
So, you've gone through all that planning around, right? Creation, expiration, features, and what are those next steps, right? You need to document your decisions. You need to lay out a plan of how that's going to roll out, and then you need to communicate to your users, right? I think one of the great concepts around that Teams rollout is training your initial users, and making them aware of these things before you give them the ability to start creating sites. So if you have a core set of users that are trained and understand they're part of the process, that came to these decisions, your adoption is just going to be much, much better.
Less resistance. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Why can't I add applications in? Are you kidding? I see this application. I really want it. Well, this is not playtime, right? This is, and it might have some enhancements, and certainly I want you to be able to do, some of the things that need to get done, but this also, needs to be a shared responsibility, I guess.
So that's really all about, getting your sites up and going, and then, right, what can you do with it after you've got them created? So again, this is another slide we pulled from our Teams 101. And these are all things that you probably should be familiar with if you have Office 365, because all of these come into play with your Office 365 tenant, and it can be pushed down to Teams as well.
Yeah, and I, in high level, I'd review these as, e-discovery's been around for quite a long time. We see maybe 50% of our customers leveraging e-discovery. Both, e-discovery contains two major elements, right? The preservation side, what are your retention policies for the data you'd like to keep? How long are you keeping it? Oftentimes, IT is waiting on guidance from the business with regards to how long that data should be kept. And they may default to, hey, for now, we're just going to keep it all. And that's what we're seeing for a fair number of organizations. Let's just keep it all until we come up with a policy, and then we're going to shave it back, right? So the preservation portion of it is one part, and the other part, smaller to some degree, and kind of depends whether it's a IT or a FOIA request or a compliance officer that might need to surface that data. So preservation and surfacing, it is all part of e-discovery, and Teams is simply a checkbox within that same capability. So Teams data, like it or not, can be treated either the same or differently than your e-discovery goals you might have for email. I'd say similar for data loss prevention. Data loss prevention's history has been in mail, outbound mail, right? Who's sharing outbound mail? Oh no, I don't want those spreadsheets with, credit card numbers or social security numbers being sent out my email. Well, how about in OneDrive if you shared it outside? Well, that's equally bad, right? I don't want that, or I do want that. So OneDrive has certainly been, it was the next frontier, and then SharePoint, and anywhere where you can store data, right? Teams being one of those locations where you can store data and make communications outside your organization. So DLP, imagine DLP's new role, not in looking at emails outbound, but in looking at a Teams conversation and a thread where Tim and I are having a conversation and Tim says something that's against our policy. And imagine in the compliance or in the thread, that thread being looked at, scrutinized, and being pulled out of that conversation so that it's not part of the actual record. Or it's not actually, I don't know if it's stored as part of the record, but the data loss prevention is pulling it out so that we're not putting, let's say, credit card numbers in the conversation thread. Mobile application management, heavily underutilized. Many people don't know that Office 365 has the ability to manage devices relative to Office 365 applications. Oftentimes this is used and thought of for email specifically. I put the application on Outlook. I can take the application off Outlook, especially when the employee leaves. And I don't need to delete the entire device. I just need to pull the mail back. How about similar things for Teams, right? Teams data and the ability to put the Teams client on there, control the Teams client so that apps or documents that are stored within Teams can't be put over in my Dropbox account, which is my secret squirrel embezzlement fund, right? Or something of that nature. So in any case, Teams client on, Teams client off, Teams data controlled. Mobile application management's included with Office 365. And then we're starting up a whole series of webinars on multi-factor authentication. Unfortunately, I think the reality is that most organizations are not leveraging a free service within Office 365 called MFA due to experience, their thoughts that the experience may suffer or that users wouldn't adopt it. But we're going to, we have an offering called One Day MFA because we believe it's so easy and so vital. We'd like to see it in and implemented within your organization, at least for administrators. And MFA is also a great way to prevent, people from joining meetings, as an example, that shouldn't be.
Uh-oh. We just lost Bruce. So I'm going to move on and hopefully he will rejoin us. So what I thought I'd do next is just do
to
a little
make sure
demo.
that Teams data is stored and secured. So multi-factor authentication. Great.
I lost you for a minute there, Bruce. I don't know if it was just me.
So those are big rocks, right? In terms of the. Okay. No, I hear you fine. So.
Okay. I'm going to jump out and we'll do a little demo of some things. Sure.
Okay, so real quick before we jump into the demo, there was one question, and I just wanted to get this out there before we switch topics. So Ed asked, what happens to content of a team site when it expires?
So if you have a retention policy in place, it can be retained based on your retention policy. If you don't have a retention policy, then it will get deleted. And there's a window, I think 30 days is the default. So you have 30 days to restore, but once you get past that 30 days, it's gone. And it looks like Bruce is still frozen, so I'm just going to carry on. So first thing I thought I'd show you is creating a site. So I have my user, Lee. I'm going to jump in here and create a site. Build it from scratch. We'll make it public. So I'm going to call it Mark 8 because we're working on the Mark 8 project. And then I just wanted to show that it is added before the name of the site, the name of the department. So if I go ahead and create that. I'm just going to skip adding users for now, but you should always add a second owner to a site in case something happens to that original owner. So now you can see that it's not just the Mark 8 site, it's manufacturing_Mark 8. And the next thing I want to show is some data loss prevention. So what I'm going to do here is Lee is going to post in the chat here that he needs a laptop ordered for this project. And he's going to include his social security number and a credit card number. So what's going to happen is this is going to get run through the data loss prevention policy. It worked when I tried it earlier. And so it may be because this site is so new, it's going to take it a little bit to run through that. So I'm going to jump over here to another one. We'll try it right here. So I'm going to do the same thing on this other site. And what it should do is it should pop up a message saying that you've got information in here that's, oh, there it goes. So this message was blocked because of the policies that I put in place. So two separate policies, one looking for financial information, another one looking for personal information. So what can I do? Nothing, because I really made this policy tight. So your only option here is report. You can have an option to override, but I don't know what scenario you would want to allow someone to send social security numbers in that fashion. So that is the second thing I wanted to show. I want to show you how we do classifications. So I'm going to jump over to a different user. And now if you edit a site, so this team is classified for external information. So I used group policy to create these classifications, and here's what they are. So I just arbitrarily picked internal, external, confidential, and highly confidential, just as some big buckets to help identify information. And so I can just come in here and change these. I want it to be highly confidential. And so now, right, I'm using that classification, and then I can set up other policies to help govern that information. What else did I want to show? Oh, I'm going to show, I didn't want to do that. So here is Azure Active Directory, and it's the group area, and that's where you set up your expiration. And so I just took a couple of the team sites that I had, and I set them up to expire. So just wanted to show, you know, every team site that gets created is based on an Active Directory group, an Azure Active Directory group. And so that's how you control these kinds of things. That's also where you do the naming. So quickly can show you that. And group naming policy. So here is where I added department and underscore. And so that policy is now controlling how sites get created. And this is not jumping back on.
Well, that's okay. We do have a question in the queue that we could get answered real quick.
Sure.
And I apologize if I'm saying this person's name wrong. Zishan asks, is Teams a good replacement for Windows file server?
Absolutely. I actually went to a 2-day class by Microsoft, and the guy happened to be sitting by, was a consultant, and he was solely working on migrating people's server file shares into Teams. It just gives you more control, because typically a shared drive is just a dumping ground. All the data just gets dumped in there. By putting it into a team site, I think you're going to be better organized, and you just have a lot more control, and you can add a lot more functionality to it. So it lets the end user be able to add people right to the site and remove them, and then with the chatting and all the other features that go with that, just a lot more control. So a little bit on the data loss prevention. This is where Bruce was going to spend a lot of time because he really knows this well. But we set this up on our demo site, and you can see, I was really found it interesting that the demo tenant that gets created by Microsoft has not real social security numbers and credit cards, but demo data. And so when we turn these policies on, it went out and looked, and it found, right, OneDrive for Business found 37 violations of these policies. So personally identifiable information, and I can go in and actually show you. So here in the locations is what, right, locations do you want to look at? And so you can create one policy to govern all of these areas, or you can create individual policies for each area. Again, I don't know why you would want to allow personally identifiable information to go out on any one of these. So for our purposes, we just set it all up the same. And then you break it down into low volume, high volume. Low volume meaning I saw this once versus I saw this, right, 100 times. I used to work for a school district, and they were pretty loose with social security numbers. Come W-2 time, a lot of employees like to email their W-2s to their significant others to do the taxes. And so I enabled this policy, and our Chief Human Resources Officer would get an email every time somebody sent a W-2 because it has the social security number in it. It's not encrypted. And so these are the things we're looking at. We're looking at taxpayer identification numbers, social security, passport numbers. And then what I've done is actions, restrict access, right? We notify the user and we send it to the administrator. And so we have that for the personal identifiable information. We also have it for financial data. So that would be credit card numbers, bank account numbers, routing numbers, driver's licenses.
And obviously these can be customized to include, things like your personal account numbers, right? Or something that's proprietary to your organization. These are just some templates that are leveraging well-known either financial or other typical private data, but you may have things that are very unique to you, whether they be recipes or account numbers or things of that nature.
Welcome back.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Xfinity was not living up to their service level agreement.
That never happens.
So
I know. I was just preparing to join via phone, and then it decided to come back. So I'm glad that you were able to carry the torch.
Yeah.
real quick, as a follow-up to that question, same Zishan asks, if DLP policy finds a sensitive information in a document and flags it, does it highlight the problematic area in the document, or what is the best way to find out what triggered the policy?
So DLP for data in motion, as mentioned, emails, you have a number of actions that can be taken when things are found. So DLP for email in motion, as an example, will allow you to encrypt the mail or something of that nature. And similarly for Teams, if it's a chat, it would go into the conversation and actually could pull that stream of conversation out of the thread. For something that's not in motion, it's just stored, something like a file, it's simply going to be highlighting, so whether the file is stored in OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, it's effectively going to be highlighting that file and noting that file as having a violation within that file. So Tim's kind of going to it and kind of showing you what some of those matches are. Those are matches on some data and showing you the spreadsheet itself, a low volume find of content. I think there was another question in Q2. I think that was about, it was a little bit more on the use case. The question itself was, is Teams a good replacement for a file server? And I think certainly in our 10 use cases for Teams, we didn't say specifically, hey, this is a great replacement for a file server, but it is a great storage location for files. I think when you're looking at a file server, you're going to need to look at it as a whole. Certainly the user drive information is typically paralleled with OneDrive. For group data, it certainly can be stored in Teams. I always look at it as having 4 specific options. I won't go through them all in detail, but in general, you can put those files all in SharePoint. You can put those files all in Teams. You can put those files all on a Azure-based file server, so the user experience is the exact same. Or there is a capability to maintain the file server on-prem and simply make a copy of that data using Azure File Sync, where the cloud has a replica copy of what's on your on-prem server. It doesn't solve every challenge, but solves some challenges. Kind of depends on which ones you're having. So unfortunately, I give you an it depends answer, and it requires a little more discussion.
I just wanted to show real quick archiving. So what I did was a search here for press release, and what it found was a press release document that is stored in the Digital Initiatives Public Relations team site. And if we come and look at my sites here, even under the hidden, right, that site doesn't show up. So if I go to Manage Teams, I come down here, I can see under Archived that here's the Digital Initiative Public Relations site. So it doesn't show up, it's archived, but when I search, I can still find the documents that are stored within there.
Excellent.
That would be nice to show us some of the stuff in action. Anything else under data loss prevention that you want to show, Bruce, for security and governance?
No, DLP, I think is heavily underutilized. Like I said, it has its history in data in motion, and I think people are just getting accustomed to looking at it. I would say, I know you had the GDPR rule there. For those organizations, it might not be front and center for you today. What GDPR is at least stipulating is that you look at all your data and you're able to tag data that has information regarding individuals. And so GDPR has a lot of rules around it, but at a minimum, your goal is to find data that has information about individuals so that you can more easily find that, pull that information back. So GDPR is all about tagging, and this is a great way to tag data, whether it be stored within Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, or otherwise. So some great tools that are kind of natively there for you to evaluate that data and begin that process if that's one of your challenges. At this point, I presume coronavirus and file sharing and other things might be more pressing, but that certainly is a good strategy.
So it was our presentation, and that's what I had to demo. I think, where do we go next? We have an envisioning a readiness project that we can come out and do for you. I know we've been getting a lot of questions recently about remote access, which teams can be a player in remote voice. We've had several companies we've been helping with getting voice set up. We just did a school district. They wanted their teachers to have phone numbers, not personal numbers. So they signed up for a monthly plan, and we went in, and within 10 minutes, we're able to request and assign 100 phone numbers for the teachers. And then the other one on here is Skype to Teams, because July 2021, Skype is going to go away and Teams is going to be your option.
Yeah, on the bottom right, we've got what I'll call our graphic. If you go to peters.com / teams, you'd see a description of it. But effectively, knowing what aspects of Teams that you want to leverage, whether it be, as the one gentleman had asked about a file server replacement. It's possible, right? It could be a very good file server replacement. Or maybe you're looking at Teams Voice, or maybe you've got Skype on-prem and you want to look at replacement of that for real-time presence and instant message, or chat as they call it nowadays. But there are 8 other use cases that we kind of defined in Teams 202. So understanding the use case, understanding what success looks like for you, and understanding how ready you are. Do you have Teams clients rolled out? Do your Office 365 licenses include Teams? If not, there's an offer from Microsoft now. Essentially, anyone who wants Teams gets Teams right now, and we can help facilitate that and inject Teams licenses into your tenant at no cost to you. It's a 6-month trial from Microsoft. And again, we just have about 2 or 3 questions to ask you as to how you got licenses, and we'll help you facilitate getting those free licenses. But Teams is here. Teams can solve some problems. We need to figure out with you, probably with our envisioning and readiness, which is a low fee engagement, to just kind of understand, what you'd like to do with your teams today or tomorrow. In terms of governance, Tim, I think in terms of topics, I know we were very focused on Teams. There's obviously a lot of little buttons that get clicked. There, you had shown me a couple days ago another larger and broader governance picture of maybe 10 or 12 categories of governance areas that are relevant for Teams as well as other things. I don't know if that categorization, if you had given further thought to that meaning of that.
This one here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a 1-page document here this is Microsoft related with regards to their understanding of governance and the areas. And you'll note that we chatted about many of these areas and specifically focused on Teams. But know that in general, these are the 12 or 14 categories of governance that are available to you, and happy to run down any of those with regards to your Teams implementation or Office 365.
And this document really is specific to how these capabilities can be used to govern Teams. So each one of these has a role in governing your Teams deployment.
Perfect. So in terms of next steps coming up, I think, Tim, you had a couple, we've got a weekly workshop. So yesterday was our first one, and we're going to be doing these every week on Wednesday at 11. Our intention with the weekly workshop is to present in 15 minutes a technology that we find our customers asking us for or seeking information about. Yesterday, ironically, we presented on Teams Voice, right? And how to kind of quickly get started, how you can rent a phone system effectively for a few months if that's your desire, how you can transition from desk phones to a more mobile ready phone. That was last week's topic, or yesterday's topic. Next week, we're covering some basics around patching, antivirus, and endpoint protection in this mobile remote worker scenario. How are you keeping up with that stuff? As well as further discussion around remote access technologies. And then we obviously have this month in cybersecurity each month, where we spend 30 minutes just breaking down stories from the month. Our March was completely dedicated to stories on how to protect remote workers, things like Citrix vulnerabilities, Windows 10 issues, VPN challenges, things of that nature. Zoom, we heard about Zoom bombing. I believe Zoom bombing was the new term that's everyone's colloquial language for the month. So if you didn't hear about it there's certainly recaps out on our website, and we'll be having another one in April, presumably probably around remote access technologies too. So.
All right, and real quickly, yep. Sorry, I jumped the gun there. Abraham asked, how can we create archive policy for Teams?
Archiving, my understanding is that is not policy-based. That's a individual site decision. Where I showed you
a setting, if you will, a setting on a per team basis, right?
Right. So expiration is a policy, retention is a policy, but archiving is a setting.
That's a good differentiator. Because archiving, to be honest, I've been in Office 365 for a long time, and archiving, there is no direct equivalent over in email, as an example. Archiving is a huge term in email, but it means 20 different things. There is nothing that parallels setting the data aside so people don't see it. It's still searchable, but equivalent. So that's
right.
That is unique.
So under my manage teams option here, I have the option to archive. So make it read-only, archive, and then it just is going to remove it from my list. It's going to make the SharePoint site read-only. And the nice thing about it is you can go back and restore. So a team admin can do this, a team owner can do this, but it's not policy-based.
And Tim, I could envision where, as part of your security and compliance portal we were in earlier, data loss prevention was one area. There's other roles for like supervisory where you might have a auditor type role that's evaluating, let's say, not only looking at and gathering some random emails or random Teams documents and looking for policy violations, but that role could also be looking at Teams and usage and saying, you know what, usage statistics on this team site are not only down, they're nil for the last 30 days. I need to inquire about archiving this and getting it off everyone's radar. It looks like it's no longer in use. So again, that supervisory role and audit role could be used from that purpose too.
Yep.
If you don't think of it in advance, when I'm setting up the site, do I want to archive it? You could do it on the back end. So. All right. Any other questions that people want to throw forward? Certainly appreciate everyone's time today. Teams governance, not necessarily always the most exciting topic, but I think it's appropriate to do as people are kind of running, running into some of these technologies, if you will, and things have accelerated. We hate to see knee-jerk projects, right? A year ago, things get planned out. In the last month or so, things aren't getting planned out. Things are getting run to, and it's okay, right? Run, get the technology and the functionality you need. Microsoft tends to be very much a functionality first. Some of their default positions on Office 365, on Teams site creations, right? The out of the box is go get functional. The need for IT to start to evaluate how we do this and plan things out when you have time. We think that time is coming up now. So, all right. In lieu of any other questions, thank you guys all very much. Tim, thanks very much for covering me when Xfinity failed me, and everyone have a great day and stay healthy.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.